People think the most dangerous beings in the galaxy walk into a room surrounded by soldiers. They don't. Sometimes they're alone, soaked in neon rain, trying not to fall apart. Acid rain hissed against the metal rooftops of Dock District 9 as Ethan Cole locked the maintenance hatch behind him and rolled the stiffness out of his shoulders. 12 straight hours repairing freight engines had left the smell of coolant and burnt wiring soaked into his gray work jacket. Above him, the orbital traffic lanes glowed like rivers of moving stars, civilian shuttles drifting through the endless dark while distant patrol cruisers blinked cold blue across the clouds. Midnight on EOS Station always felt tired, the kind of tired that settled into steel beams and old bones. Ethan pulled his hood higher as a gust of freezing wind swept through the alleyway, carrying the sound of muffled music from nearby bars packed with off-duty pilots and military crews. His boots splashed through shallow puddles reflecting red holograms and flickering advertisements written in 6 alien languages. Somewhere overhead, a docking siren groaned through the rain. Another cargo hauler arriving late. Another night ending exactly like every other. Then he saw her. At first, she looked like just another officer leaving the officer's district. White military coat, tall frame, silver hair darkened by rainwater. But nobody walked around Commander Veolyra Thorne by accident. Even on a blurry holoscreen, people recognized her face instantly. The woman who ended the siege of Orion. The commander who never smiled. The alien they called the Ice Commander. Ethan stopped under the glow of a broken neon sign as she stumbled against the side of a transit pillar hard enough to rattle the metal. 2 civilians nearby immediately lowered their eyes and walked the other direction. Nobody wanted trouble with military command. Especially not with her. Veolyra stood motionless for a few seconds, one hand pressed against the wall while rain streamed down the sharp lines of her turquoise skin. Her white uniform was stained near the shoulder with dark blue blood that the storm hadn't completely washed away yet. In one gloved hand, she held a silver medal so tightly her knuckles trembled. Ethan frowned. The station news had celebrated her all week. Hero of the frontier. Savior of the colonies. Yet standing here beneath the rain and neon, she looked less like a commander and more like someone trying very hard not to break in public. A passing mag train roared overhead, flooding the alley with pale light for half a second. Ethan caught the expression on her face. Not anger, not pride, exhaustion, the kind that sleep couldn't fix. Veolyra suddenly took another step and nearly collapsed. Ethan moved before he thought about it. His hand caught her arm just before her knees hit the pavement. Up close, she was taller than he expected, almost forcing him to brace himself against her weight. Her body temperature felt alarmingly cold even through the soaked fabric of her uniform. Golden eyes snapped toward him instantly, sharp with instinct despite the alcohol clouding them. Don't, she warned quietly, her voice rough and strained. Ethan raised one hand slightly. Easy, you're bleeding. I'm fine. The sentence came out too fast, too automatic. Like she'd repeated it 1,000 times before. Another gust of rain swept across the district. Veolyra's balance failed again for a split second, and this time she didn't pull away when Ethan steadied her. Somewhere nearby, people were watching now, pretending not to. Ethan glanced toward the glowing military sector 3 blocks away. No escorts, no guards, no official transport. Just the most feared commander in the sector standing alone in the rain with blood on her uniform and whiskey on her breath. You live nearby? Ethan asked. Veolyra stared at him through wet silver strands clinging to her face. For a moment, she looked genuinely confused by the question. Then her eyes drifted downward toward the medal in her hand. No, she whispered. The word barely survived the storm. Ethan looked up at the endless city lights above them, then back at her shaking hand wrapped around the silver medal like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Okay, he said softly. Then you're coming with me. The elevator groaned the entire way up to the residential sector, old cables rattling above Ethan's head while rainwater dripped from the hem of Veolyra's white command coat onto the scratched metal floor. She leaned against the corner silently, arms folded tight across herself as if holding her body together by force alone. The silver medal still rested in her hand. She had not let go of it once. Ethan pressed the maintenance override when the lift stalled between floors for 3 full seconds. Piece of junk, he muttered. Veolyra's golden eyes shifted toward him for the first time since they entered the elevator. You insult machinery often? Her voice sounded steadier now, though exhaustion still dragged beneath every word. Ethan shrugged. Only the machines I work with. A faint sound escaped her then. Not quite a laugh. More like the memory of one. The elevator finally jerked upward again with a tired mechanical whine. Outside the scratched plexiglass panel, EOS station stretched endlessly through the rain. Thousands of lights glowing inside the dark skeleton of the orbital city. Cargo lanes. Civilian apartments. Refueling towers. Tiny lives stacked on top of each other beneath steel and vacuum. Ethan lived near the bottom levels where the station always smelled faintly like engine fuel and overheated circuits. Cheap rent. Thin walls. Honest people trying to survive. He glanced sideways at Veilira. The commander looked completely out of place here. Her white uniform alone probably cost more than 6 months of his paycheck. Yet the closer they got to his floor, the more she seemed to shrink into herself. Not physically, emotionally. Like every passing second outside the battlefield made her less certain how to exist. The elevator doors hissed open onto a dim hallway lit by flickering amber strips overhead. Ethan led her toward the last apartment at the far end beside the maintenance stairwell. It is small, he warned while unlocking the door. I was not expecting company tonight. Veilira remained silent as she stepped inside. Warm air rolled over them immediately, carrying the smell of coffee grounds, machine oil, and old cedar wood from the shelves Ethan built himself years ago. The apartment sat above the hangar garage where he repaired civilian shuttles during the day. Every now and then the floor vibrated softly from docking clamps engaging below. Home. Simple. Quiet. Safe. Veilira stood just inside the doorway while rainwater dripped onto the floorboards beneath her boots. Her gaze moved slowly across the room. The old leather couch. Stacks of engine manuals. A faded family photograph hanging crooked near the kitchen. A yellow maintenance drone charging in the corner beside scattered tools. Human things. Ordinary things. Ethan grabbed a towel from the bathroom and handed it to her carefully. You can sit down before you fall down. Veilira stared at the towel for a second, as if unfamiliar with kindness that expected nothing back. Then she accepted it with slow, deliberate movements. You realize, she said quietly, if military command discovers I am here, your life becomes very complicated. Ethan pulled off his soaked work jacket and tossed it over a chair. Lady, my elevator already tried to kill us twice tonight. My life is already complicated. Another almost smile touched the corner of her mouth before disappearing. She finally lowered herself onto the couch with visible effort. The movement caused her sleeve to shift slightly, revealing thin silver lines running beneath the turquoise skin near her wrist. Neural implants. Military grade. Ethan had seen similar systems before on veterans coming back from frontier conflicts. But hers looked worse. Overheated. The faint glow beneath her skin flickered unevenly. Veilira noticed him looking immediately and tugged the sleeve back down. It is nothing. Ethan walked toward the small kitchen. That is usually what people say right before passing out. He filled a glass with water while the apartment hummed softly around them. Outside, rain hammered the station windows in endless waves. Somewhere far below, a cargo horn echoed through the docks. For a while neither of them spoke. Then Veilira finally looked down at the metal in her hand. Her fingers tightened around the silver edges hard enough to make them creak softly. Do humans always bring strangers home? She asked without looking up. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, studying the tired commander sitting beneath the dim apartment lights. Only the ones standing alone in the rain. For the first time that night, Veilira did not have an answer. The rain finally began to weaken sometime after 2 in the morning, fading from a violent metallic roar into a softer rhythm against the apartment windows. Ethan sat at the small kitchen counter nursing reheated coffee while the ancient ventilation fan buzzed overhead with uneven determination. Across the room, Commander Veilira Thorne had not moved much in nearly 20 minutes. She remained seated on the couch beneath the dim amber lights, one hand wrapped around the glass of water he gave her earlier, the other still holding the silver medal against her lap like something cursed. The station clock projected onto the wall read 2:17 a.m. in pale blue numbers. Ethan glanced toward her again. Military officers usually carried themselves like statues. Straight posture, controlled breathing, perfect composure drilled into them until emotion became another thing hidden behind protocol. Veilira looked different now, tired enough for the cracks to show. Her silver hair had started drying in loose waves around her shoulders, and without the rain masking it, Ethan could see faint discoloration beneath her eyes. Exhaustion. Real exhaustion. The kind that accumulated over years instead of days. You should probably sleep, Ethan said quietly. Veolira's gaze remained fixed on the floor. I do not sleep well. Nobody does on this station. Walls are too thin. A faint vibration rolled through the apartment as a heavy freighter disengaged from docking ring for below them. Somewhere down the hallway, a baby started crying briefly before a door slid shut. Ordinary sounds. Human sounds. Veolira listened to them carefully, like someone hearing a language she had forgotten existed. Ethan stood and crossed toward the storage cabinet near the kitchen. He pulled out an old thermal blanket and placed it carefully on the edge of the couch beside her. Not exactly luxury military housing, he admitted, but it is warm. Veolira looked down at the folded blanket without touching it. You are strangely calm about this. About what? A high-ranking alien commander sitting in your apartment at 2 in the morning. Ethan shrugged lightly. You look more exhausted than dangerous right now. For the first time, her expression shifted slightly. Not offense. Surprise. As though nobody had spoken to her like a normal person in a very long time. The silence stretched between them again, but this time it felt less sharp. Softer somehow. Outside the station windows, distant ship lights drifted slowly through the dark like silent stars. Ethan noticed Veolira's hand trembling again around the metal. Smaller tremors now. Subtle, but constant. That thing must weigh 50 pounds the way you hold it, he said carefully. Veolira's jaw tightened. It was awarded after Orion. Ethan nodded slowly. Everybody in the galaxy knew about Orion. News feeds had called it the battle that saved the frontier colonies from collapse. Veolira became a living legend overnight after that campaign. Statues, interviews, military honors, children wearing toy command uniforms with her insignia printed on the sleeves. But legends were cleaner than reality. Reality sat on Ethan's couch staring at a medal like it belonged to someone else. You hate it, he realized quietly. Veolira's golden eyes flicked toward him instantly. Sharp, guarded. Then slowly, painfully, the tension left her shoulders. This medal, she said after a long pause, is given to commanders who make necessary sacrifices. The way she said the last two words made them sound heavy enough to sink ships. Ethan stayed silent. Veolira looked back down at the silver surface reflecting the apartment lights. At Orion, she continued softly, there were civilian evacuation carriers trapped behind the blockade. The only path open required one of our own defense cruisers to overload its reactor and collapse the enemy corridor long enough for the civilians to escape. Ethan felt the air change in the room. You gave the order. Veolira nodded once. Very small. 3,000 crew members volunteered to remain aboard the cruiser. Her voice almost failed on the final word. The colonies celebrated me afterward. They called it strategic brilliance. She stared at the medal in silence for several seconds before speaking again. Every year they award another one of these. Every year commanders pretend survival and sacrifice are the same thing. Ethan looked at the exhausted alien woman sitting beneath the soft apartment lights while the station hummed quietly around them. No speeches, no cameras, no military ceremony. Just grief wearing a white uniform. Finally, he stood from the counter and walked toward the old coffee machine near the stove. What are you doing? Veolira asked quietly. Ethan grabbed another mug from the cabinet. Making fresh coffee. At this hour? Lady, he said while pouring water into the machine. You clearly are not sleeping tonight. And honestly, neither am I. For the first time since entering the apartment, Commander Veolira Thorn lowered the medal from her hands. The coffee machine sputtered and rattled like it was personally offended to be awake at 3 in the morning. Ethan leaned against the counter while steam slowly filled the apartment with the bitter smell of dark roast and overheated wiring. Outside the windows, EO's station had settled into that strange quiet that only happened before dawn. Cargo traffic slowed. Bar signs dimmed. Even the endless hum of the orbital city softened into something distant and tired. Veolira remained on the couch wrapped loosely in the thermal blanket now, though she wore it awkwardly, like someone unfamiliar with being cared for. The white command coat rested folded beside her, exposing the dark undersuit beneath lined with silver circuitry along the sleeves and collar. Without the armor and insignias, she looked less like a commander and more like a woman who had not rested properly in years. Ethan carried 2 mugs over carefully and placed one on the small table in front of her. Fair warning, he said, sitting down across from her. This coffee could probably remove paint from a shuttle. Veolyra stared down at the mug as steam curled upward into the dim apartment light. Human coffee has a reputation throughout military command. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Good reputation or bad reputation? Dangerous. Reputation. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. That sounds about right. For a few moments they drank in silence. Veolyra held the mug carefully between both hands as though absorbing the warmth through her skin. Ethan noticed the faint tremors in her fingers had started easing. Not gone completely, but quieter now. The station lights outside reflected softly across her turquoise features while the first distant traces of morning began creeping into the clouds beyond the windows. You live alone? She asked eventually. Ethan nodded once. Been that way for a while. Veolyra's gaze drifted toward the faded photograph hanging near the kitchen doorway. Ethan followed her eyes automatically. The picture showed an older couple standing beside a rusted cargo shuttle with a teenage version of Ethan between them grinning into the camera. Before orbital cities. Before wars. Before life became smaller and lonelier. Your family? She asked softly. My parents. Ethan took another sip of coffee. They owned a repair shop planetside before the climate storms got bad. Veolyra studied the photograph quietly. You kept the image. Most people do. Not among my species. Ethan looked at her curiously. Veolyra rested the coffee mug against her knee while soft morning light slowly gathered around the edges of the room. Among the Verathi, she explained, grief is considered a private burden. Physical reminders are often destroyed after death to preserve emotional discipline. Ethan frowned slightly. You erase people? We preserve function, she corrected gently. Attachment is believed to weaken judgment. Ethan glanced around his cluttered apartment. Old tools, handwritten notes, shelves full of broken machine parts he never threw away because every object carried a memory attached to it. Human beings collected pieces of their lives constantly. Ticket stubs, photographs, clothing, tiny emotional anchors scattered through time. Sounds lonely, he said quietly. Veolyra lowered her eyes to the coffee in her hands. It is efficient. Ethan noticed she did not say he was wrong. The silence between them settled again, but now it carried less tension than before. More curiosity. Veolyra's gaze slowly wandered around the apartment once more, lingering on the maintenance drone charging in the corner. The little machine suddenly chirped awake, its yellow sensor light blinking sleepily before it rolled 3 inches forward and stopped. What is that? She asked. That, Ethan said with a sigh, is Walter. He fixes things badly. As if offended, the drone released an annoyed electronic buzz. Veolyra blinked once. Then unexpectedly, quietly, she laughed. The sound caught Ethan completely off guard. Not polished. Not diplomatic. Real. Soft enough that it almost disappeared beneath the hum of the apartment. But it changed the entire room. Veolyra seemed startled by it too. Her expression froze afterward like she had forgotten how laughter was supposed to feel. Ethan smiled into his coffee mug. There it is. What? She asked cautiously. Proof you are actually alive under all that military frost. Veolyra looked away quickly, but Ethan caught the faint shift of color along her turquoise cheeks beneath the station lights. Outside the window, the black sky above Eos Station had started turning dark blue, dawn approaching slowly through the endless orbital clouds. Veolyra watched it in silence for several seconds before speaking again. I had forgotten, she admitted quietly, what ordinary life sounds like. Ethan followed her gaze toward the waking city beyond the glass. Somewhere below them, a bakery powered on for the morning shift. Dock alarms echoed faintly across the station. Farther away, civilian transports drifted through the pale glow of artificial sunrise. Small lives beginning another day. That is because, Ethan said softly, you have been surviving for too long instead of living. Veolyra did not answer. But this time, she did not look away from the dawn either. Morning arrived slowly over Eos Station, not with sunlight, but with layers of artificial dawn filtering through the orbital shield above the city. The windows of Ethan's apartment glowed pale gold as civilian traffic resumed across the distant docking lanes. Somewhere below, engines rumbled awake beneath the hangar floor while station announcements echoed faintly through old ventilation shafts. Ethan stood near the stove flipping synthetic eggs in a scratched frying pan, while Walter the maintenance drone rolled circles around his boots, making irritated electronic chirps every time grease popped too close to its sensors. Behind him, the apartment remained unusually quiet. Veolira had fallen asleep sometime near dawn. Ethan noticed it almost accidentally while washing coffee mugs. 1 second, she had been staring out the window wrapped in the thermal blanket. The next, her breathing slowed, and the tension finally disappeared from her shoulders. She slept sitting upright against the couch cushions, silver hair falling loosely across one side of her face, while pale morning light softened the sharp lines that usually made her look untouchable on military broadcasts. Without the rigid posture and cold command expression, she looked younger somehow. Less like a symbol, more like someone who had simply carried too much for too long. Ethan lowered the stove heat carefully so the pan would stop hissing. He moved quieter after that. Instinctively, like the apartment itself understood she needed rest more than conversation. A soft chime suddenly interrupted the silence. Veolira's command bracer lit up immediately where it rested on the table beside the couch. Bright crimson symbols flashed rapidly across the display. Incoming military transmission. Priority level 1. Ethan glanced toward her automatically. She did not wake. The bracer continued pulsing steadily in the dim room like a heartbeat. After several seconds, the transmission terminated itself. Then another arrived almost immediately. Ethan frowned slightly. Whoever was searching for her clearly had not stopped all night. The eggs finished cooking with a final crackle. Ethan transferred breakfast onto 2 plates before carrying one carefully toward the couch. "Commander," he said quietly. No response. Veolira. This time her eyes opened instantly. Sharp. Alert. Military reflexes activating before consciousness fully caught up. Her hand moved halfway toward her missing sidearm before stopping abruptly. Confusion crossed her face for half a second. Then memory returned. The apartment. The rain. The coffee. Ethan standing nearby holding breakfast plates like this was somehow normal. Veolira blinked slowly and sat straighter beneath the blanket. "I apologize," she said immediately. "I did not intend to fall asleep." Ethan handed her the plate. "Pretty sure your body disagreed." She accepted the food carefully, staring at it for a second. "You cooked." "Technically." Ethan sat across from her with his own plate. "Nobody has died from it yet." Veolira studied the meal with open uncertainty. Human breakfast appears aggressively beige. Ethan nearly laughed. That might be the most accurate thing anybody has ever said about human food. To his surprise, Veolira took a cautious bite. Then another. The smallest shift crossed her expression afterward. Not exactly approval, but definitely confusion. "It is better than military nutrition packs." "That is because these eggs once had hopes and dreams." Veolira looked at him for a long moment before another quiet laugh escaped her unexpectedly. Softer than before. Easier this time. The sound lingered warmly inside the apartment while morning light continued spreading across the room. Ethan noticed she had stopped clutching the metal entirely. It still rested untouched on the table beside the silent command bracer. For the first time since last night, something else held her attention. "Your station life is strange," Veolira admitted while looking around the apartment again. "That is because you are used to military life." Ethan shrugged lightly. "Down here nobody cares about rank very much. Rent is still due whether you command fleets or repair engines." Veolira's golden eyes drifted toward the kitchen shelves lined with old machine parts and handwritten repair notes. "Among my people," she said quietly, "commanders are separated from civilians intentionally. Emotional attachment is believed to compromise authority." Ethan stabbed at his breakfast with a fork. "Sounds miserable." "It is tradition. Tradition can still be miserable." Veolira fell silent after that. Not offended. Thinking. Outside the apartment windows, transport ships drifted through the glowing skyline while the station fully awakened around them. Another soft chime interrupted the room. Her command bracer flashed again. This time the message preview remained visible across the screen long enough for Ethan to read the first line. "Command authority requesting immediate status confirmation." Veolira stared at the message without moving. Then calmly, deliberately, she reached over and muted the device completely. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Ignoring military command seems dangerous. Veolira looked out the window toward the growing light beyond the station towers. "At this moment," she said softly, "I think I would rather remain here." By late morning, The rain outside had finally stopped. Water still clung to the station windows in long silver streaks, while pale artificial sunlight spread across Dock District 9. Ethan stood beneath the open engine housing of a battered civilian shuttle in the hangar below his apartment, tightening a coolant valve with grease-covered hands while old rock music crackled softly through overhead speakers. Above him, cargo cranes groaned back to life and workers shouted across the docking lanes as another day on EOS station dragged itself forward. Normal. Routine. Yet every few minutes Ethan caught himself glancing toward the metal staircase leading up to his apartment. He still could not fully process the fact that Commander Valyra Thorne was upstairs drinking coffee in his kitchen like any ordinary guest. The thought felt surreal every single time it crossed his mind. Walter rolled beside him carrying loose tools in its tiny cargo tray while emitting smug electronic chirps. "You are entirely too proud of carrying screws," Ethan muttered. The drone beeped louder in response. A shadow moved above near the stair railing. Ethan looked up instinctively. Valyra stood there quietly observing the hangar floor below. She had removed the white command coat entirely now, leaving only the dark military undersuit that traced silver circuitry along her arms and collarbone. Without the heavy uniform, she blended strangely well into the industrial atmosphere around her. Almost unnoticed. Almost human. Her silver hair shifted softly in the warm airflow, drifting through the hangar vents while distant docking lights reflected gold in her eyes. "So this is what you do every day," she said. Ethan grabbed a rag and wiped oil from his hands. "Mostly I insult broken engines until they cooperate." Valyra slowly descended the stairs into the hangar. Several nearby workers immediately recognized her and froze mid-conversation. One mechanic nearly dropped a plasma wrench onto his own boot. Another stared openly before pretending to inspect cargo manifests with sudden intense professionalism. Ethan noticed it instantly. Fear. Respect. Distance. The same reaction she probably received everywhere she went. Valyra noticed too. Her posture shifted automatically colder after that, shoulders straightening beneath invisible armor. Ethan hated how fast it happened. Like she had spent years learning to become untouchable the second other people entered the room. He tossed the rag aside and pointed toward the open shuttle engine instead. "Come look at this." Valyra blinked once, caught slightly off guard by the invitation. Then she stepped beside him beneath the suspended engine housing. Heat rolled gently from the exposed reactor couplings, while diagnostic lights blinked red across the control panel. "Cooling regulator failed during atmospheric descent," Ethan explained while tapping the damaged component with a screwdriver. Pilot ignored warning alarms for almost 200 miles. Valyra examined the machine carefully. "That would have caused a thermal overload." "Exactly." Ethan nodded approvingly. "Finally someone around here who respects warning systems." To his surprise, Valyra crouched beside the engine and studied the damaged couplings more closely. "This alignment is incorrect," she said after a moment. Ethan frowned. "What?" She pointed toward the regulator housing. "The pressure imbalance is not from pilot error. The intake converter was installed backwards." Ethan stared at the engine, then at her, then back at the engine. 30 seconds later he groaned loudly. "You have got to be kidding me." Valyra tilted her head slightly. "Was I incorrect?" "No," Ethan admitted while rubbing a hand across his face. "Which somehow makes this worse." For the first time since entering the hangar, real amusement flickered across her features. Not restrained this time. Genuine. Ethan suddenly realized something important then. Beneath the medals and command authority and military discipline, Valyra was intensely intelligent. The kind of intelligence sharpened by pressure and responsibility until it became instinct. "You understand engineering?" he asked. "Fleet commanders are expected to understand every system aboard their ships." She glanced around the hangar thoughtfully. Although civilian repair methods appear significantly more chaotic, that is because civilian repair methods involve surviving on terrible budgets. Valyra's eyes drifted toward the workers nearby. They were still watching her cautiously from a distance, waiting for orders that would never come. Ethan noticed the familiar coldness beginning to return around her again. The protective wall. The commander mask. Before it could settle completely, Walter suddenly rolled directly into Valyra's boot and let out an offended beep. She looked down in surprise. The drone responded by projecting a tiny holographic warning symbol accusing her of obstructing workplace efficiency. Ethan burst out laughing immediately. Veolyra stared at the drone for 2 full seconds before another quiet laugh escaped her despite herself. Nearby workers froze again. Not because they feared her this time, because none of them had apparently ever heard Commander Veolyra Thorn laugh before. Veolyra slowly realized it too as silence spread awkwardly across the hangar. Her expression tightened instinctively. But Ethan simply leaned against the shuttle engine, smiling slightly. "There," he said softly. "That sounds a lot better than command speeches." For a moment, standing beneath the warm glow of docking lights and humming engines, the commander forgot to put the walls back up. The station alarms began just after sunset. Not emergency sirens. Docking alerts. Deep metallic pulses rolling through EOS station every 15 seconds as something massive entered civilian airspace overhead. Ethan looked up from beneath the shuttle engine immediately. Around the hangar, workers slowed. Conversations stopped halfway through sentences. Even Walter rotated its sensor light upward toward the ceiling vents as the floor vibrated faintly beneath them. Veolyra stood near the maintenance terminal reviewing civilian fuel reports Ethan had jokingly assigned her earlier in the afternoon. The moment the alarms sounded, all warmth vanished from her expression. The commander returned instantly. Her posture straightened. Her eyes sharpened. Every invisible wall slid back into place. Ethan noticed her hand tighten once against the edge of the terminal. Not fear exactly. Anticipation. "That does not sound civilian," he said carefully. Veolyra looked toward the distant station windows, where blue flashes reflected faintly against the skyline. "No," she answered quietly. "It does not." Another pulse echoed through the district. Then came the station announcement overhead. "Attention, all docking personnel. Military arrival procedures are now in effect. Civilian flight lanes are temporarily suspended." A heavy silence spread across the hangar afterward. Everyone understood what that meant. Military command had arrived personally. Ethan glanced toward Veolyra again. Her face remained controlled, but he saw it this time. Exhaustion beneath the discipline. Like someone watching a storm finally catch up to them. One of the younger mechanics hurried toward the main hangar doors and peeked through the reinforced glass panels facing the skyline. "Holy hell," he whispered. Ethan stepped closer beside him. Above the city towers, 3 enormous military cruisers hovered through the clouds like moving mountains of steel and blue fire. Searchlights swept slowly across the station districts while escort fighters circled in precise formation around the lead vessel bearing the silver insignia of Verathi High Command. Nearby workers exchanged nervous glances immediately. Nobody wanted military operations inside civilian sectors, especially not command fleets. Ethan looked back toward Veolyra. "Friends of yours?" She did not answer right away. Her golden eyes remained fixed on the distant cruisers visible beyond the hangar entrance. "Officially," she said at last, "they are here to retrieve me." And unofficially, a long pause followed. "Some members of military command believe my recent peace negotiations have made me politically unstable." Ethan frowned. "Because you stopped a war?" "Because I questioned whether endless war was necessary." Her voice remained calm, but something painful hid beneath it. "Among my people, commanders are respected for victory, not restraint." Outside, another wave of docking alarms echoed through the station. Workers throughout the hangar began quietly shutting down equipment. Nobody said it directly, but everyone understood tension when they saw it. Ethan leaned against the workbench near her. "You planning to go back?" Veolyra lowered her eyes briefly. "I do not know." That answer surprised him more than anything else she had said since arriving. This was Commander Veolyra Thorn. The woman entire fleets obeyed without hesitation. Yet standing inside a civilian repair hangar beneath flickering work lights, she suddenly looked uncertain. Human. Walter rolled between them carrying loose bolts before projecting a holographic message requesting maintenance authorization. Ethan snorted softly and tapped the drone's sensor light. "Bad timing, Walter." To his surprise, Veolyra smiled faintly at the little machine before the expression faded again. Another station announcement crackled overhead. "Attention residents of Dock District 9. Military personnel are authorized to begin sector search operations." The hangar grew completely silent after that. Ethan looked toward the massive cruisers hanging above the skyline, while cold blue lights swept across distant towers. Then he looked back at Veolyra standing beside him beneath the warm industrial glow of the repair bay. For the first time since meeting her, he realized something important. The commander was not afraid of war. She was afraid of returning to the version of herself that existed before this place. Before coffee at dawn. Before ordinary conversations. Before someone looked at her and saw a person instead of a weapon. Veolyra exhaled slowly and removed the silver medal from her pocket again. She stared at it for several seconds while military sirens echoed through the station around them. They will expect me to stand before them unchanged, she said quietly. Ethan crossed his arms. And are you? Her fingers tightened slightly around the medal. Then, for the first time, she looked directly at him instead of through him. No, she admitted softly. I do not think I am. Night settled heavily across Eos Station as military searchlights swept through the lower districts in slow blue arcs. From the rooftop above Ethan's apartment building, the entire orbital city looked caught between two worlds. Below them, civilian life still struggled forward beneath flickering neon signs and crowded transit lanes. Above them, the massive Varathi cruisers hovered silently through the clouds like judgment waiting to descend. Ethan leaned against the rooftop railing with two steaming cups of coffee balanced carefully in his hands while cold wind rolled across the station skyline. Somewhere far below, docking alarms echoed faintly between steel towers. Veolyra stood several feet away near the edge of the roof, her silver hair moving softly in the wind as she stared toward the military fleet above the city. She had been quiet for nearly 20 minutes since they came upstairs. Not tense this time. Thoughtful. The silver medal still rested in her hand. Ethan walked over and handed her one of the coffee cups. You really should stop making life decisions while staring dramatically at spaceships, he said. Veolyra accepted the cup slowly. Is that official human wisdom? Absolutely. Very ancient tradition. To his relief, the corner of her mouth lifted faintly again. Small victories. The rooftop heaters hummed quietly nearby, while warm air drifted around them. Ethan leaned beside her against the railing and followed her gaze upward. The lead military cruiser dominated the skyline now, silver insignias glowing along its armored hull. Search craft moved continuously between docking platforms like restless insects. Do they know where you are? He asked. Veolyra took a slow sip of coffee before answering. Probably. Ethan looked sideways at her. You sound surprisingly calm about that. Military intelligence has tracked fugitives through asteroid storms and planetary collapses. Her golden eyes drifted toward the civilian districts below. Finding one exhausted commander inside a station this size would not be difficult. Ethan nodded once. Then why are they waiting? Veolyra remained silent for several seconds. The wind carried distant engine noise across the rooftop, while artificial stars flickered faintly through gaps in the cloud cover above. Because, she said quietly at last, they are waiting for me to return willingly. Ethan frowned slightly. And if you do not? Veolyra looked down at the coffee cup, warming her hands. Then this becomes political. The sentence settled heavily between them. Ethan studied her profile in the pale rooftop lights. For the first time since meeting her, she looked truly tired. Not physically, spiritually, like someone standing at the edge of a life they no longer recognized. You know, Ethan said softly, for somebody called the Ice Commander, you spend a lot of time looking worried. Veolyra exhaled quietly through her nose. Among my people, commanders are not permitted uncertainty. That sounds unhealthy. It is necessary. Ethan shook his head. No, winning wars might be necessary. Pretending you do not feel anything is just loneliness wearing a uniform. Veolyra turned toward him then. Fully. The wind shifted silver strands of hair across her face, while distant blue searchlights moved across the clouds behind her. Do humans always speak this openly? She asked. Ethan shrugged lightly. Only after enough coffee. For a moment neither of them spoke. The silence felt different now. Comfortable. The kind built slowly through shared hours and honest exhaustion. Veolyra looked back out across the station skyline, where thousands of tiny apartment lights glowed against the dark. When I was younger, she said quietly, I believed command meant becoming stronger than fear. Ethan listened without interrupting. But eventually I realized command only meant becoming farther away from everyone else. Her fingers tightened slightly around the coffee cup. Every promotion created more distance, more protocol, more silence. She looked down toward the crowded civilian districts below them. Until last night, I had forgotten what ordinary conversation felt like. Ethan smiled faintly against the rooftop wind. You are doing pretty well at it now. Veolyra's eyes met his again. Softer this time. That is because you speak to me like I am a person. Ethan blinked once, caught unexpectedly off guard by the honesty in her voice. Above them, one of the military cruisers slowly shifted position across the skyline, engines glowing pale blue against the clouds. Time running out. Veolyra looked toward the approaching dawn line beginning to brighten faintly at the edge of the station horizon. Tomorrow, she said quietly, I will have to decide whether I return to them. Ethan rested his arms against the railing beside her. And what happens if you do? Veolyra stared at the fleet for a long moment before answering. Then this place becomes a memory. The wind carried silence between them afterward. Not empty silence. Heavy silence. The kind that appears when two people realize something important at exactly the same moment. Finally, Ethan lifted his coffee cup slightly toward the glowing horizon. Then maybe, he said softly, we should make the most of tonight. For the first time in years, Commander Veolyra Thorne smiled without hiding it. Dawn arrived over Eos Station in layers of pale gold and cold blue lights spilling across the endless towers of steel and glass. From the rooftop above Dock District 9, the military cruisers still hovered silently beyond the clouds, their massive silhouettes watching over the city like patient giants. Ethan stood beside the railing with both hands wrapped around a cooling coffee mug while the station slowly awakened beneath them. Somewhere below, cargo crews shouted shift changes across the docks. Shuttle engines hummed to life. Another ordinary morning beginning beneath an extraordinary sky. Veolyra stood several feet away, facing the horizon. She wore her white command coat again. The silver insignias rested sharply against the fabric, every line perfect once more. Commander Veolyra Thorne had returned. Yet somehow she looked different. Now than the woman Ethan found alone in the rain 2 nights earlier. Less frozen. Less distant. More real. The wind moved gently through her silver hair as sunlight touched the turquoise tones of her skin. In her hand, the silver metal remained still for once. Not clenched, just held. A soft mechanical tone suddenly echoed across the rooftop. Veolyra's command bracer illuminated one final time before projecting a holographic message into the cold morning air. Command extraction team ready for arrival. Ethan looked toward the fleet above the station skyline. Time was up. Veolyra stared at the message for several seconds without moving. Then slowly, deliberately, she deactivated the display. Silence settled between them afterward. Heavy but peaceful. Ethan set his coffee mug down on the railing beside him. So, he said softly, this is where the commander gives an inspiring speech before leaving. Veolyra glanced sideways at him. I suspect you would dislike an inspiring speech. Probably. That familiar small smile appeared again. Warmer now. Real enough to reach her eyes. Ethan noticed something then that surprised him more than anything else over the past 2 days. He was going to miss her. Not the famous commander from the broadcasts. Not the military legend hanging above the station in giant holograms. The woman who laughed at his terrible coffee. The woman who sat quietly beside him watching sunrise through dirty apartment windows. The woman who finally stopped pretending she felt nothing. Veolyra stepped closer until they stood side by side, overlooking the waking city below. Among my people, she said quietly, there is a belief that dawn reveals truth. Ethan folded his arms against the cold rooftop wind. Sounds poetic for a military culture. It is not meant to be poetic. Her golden eyes drifted toward the horizon. It means darkness allows people to hide from themselves. Dawn does not. Ethan looked at her carefully. And what truth did dawn show you? Veolyra remained silent for a long moment while the first direct rays of sunlight broke through the clouds above Eos Station. The golden light reflected across her white uniform and silver hair until she almost seemed unreal against the skyline. Then finally she answered, that I was becoming someone I no longer wished to be. Ethan felt that sentence settle deeply somewhere inside his chest. Veolyra turned toward him fully then. No command mask. No military distance. Just honesty. You treated me like a person when I had forgotten how to be one. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but no words arrived fast enough. Veolyra reached into her coat slowly and removed the silver metal. The same metal she could barely stand to touch 2 nights ago. She looked down at it once before placing it carefully into Ethan's hand. Keep it, she said softly. Ethan blinked in surprise. Veolyra, this belongs to you. No, she answered quietly. It belongs to the commander they wanted me to become. Her fingers closed gently around his hand for one brief moment. Warm despite the cold air around them. You reminded me there are other ways to lead. Somewhere above the station, a transport shuttle descended from the waiting cruiser fleet. Its engines glowed pale blue against the morning clouds while docking alarms echoed softly across the skyline. Veolyra stepped back slowly. Ethan looked at the metal resting heavily in his palm. Then back at her. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Veolyra glanced toward the arriving shuttle before meeting his eyes one final time. "Now," she said softly, "I go stop a war." The shuttle touched down moments later on the adjacent platform. Military officers emerged in polished uniforms, waiting in silence for their commander to return. Veolyra took several steps toward them before stopping once more at the edge of the rooftop. She looked back at Ethan standing beneath the dawn light with coffee stains on his jacket and grease still on his hands. Ordinary human. Ordinary kindness. The thing an entire galaxy of commanders and politicians had forgotten how to value. For the first time in years, Commander Veolyra Thorne no longer looked afraid of the morning. And as the shuttle doors closed behind her, Ethan realized something quietly devastating beneath the rising light of Eos Station. Some people enter your life like storms. Others arrive like dawn.